Good afternoon and evening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Secrets of Face Reading. How to tell really cool things about people just by reading their faces. I'm your dandy, delightful host, David Snyder, here to wow you with some amazingly cool stuff. Is always my job. You know, when I started, hey there, Logan, how you doing? You know, when I started teaching back when I first moved to San Diego back in, I think it was 2005. I came down here and I had all this cool stuff that I love to do, but I had nobody cool to do it with. And so, you know, I guess I'd seen the advertisements for Field of Dreams once too many times. A little voice in my head said, if you build it, they will come. So I just started putting meetups out there for teaching cool stuff to people, to cool people. Anybody here like to do cool stuff? If you like to do cool stuff, go ahead and type that in the chat. Right? Don't tell me what you like to do. That's entirely private. But if you like to do cool stuff, go ahead and say, I love to do cool stuff, David. Right? And how many of you out here would classify yourself as liking to hang out with cool people? Anybody here like to hang out with cool people? Go ahead and type that in the chat. Right? And then finally, my next question, if you haven't figured it out yet, this is a highly interactive webinar. How many people here like to do cool things with cool people? Cool stuff with cool people. Go ahead and type that in the chat if you're one of those people. If you're one of those people, you're in the right place, because what we're going to share with you tonight is easily one of the coolest things I have ever discovered. And I've been very fortunate in my life to discover a lot of cool shit, right? I've been even more fortunate to find ways to put all these cool things together in ways that give you a practical real world result that's greater than the sum of the parts. Now, I didn't do these things for you. I'm gonna be right up front with you. The things I'm gonna share with you, I didn't go out and learn them and practice them and research them specifically to help other people. I had problems in my life that I wanted to solve, that I needed a fix for, and I was bound and determined to do whatever it took to get the life I wanted the way I wanted it. And I just spent thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably close to millions now, to find those secrets. Anybody here are willing to do whatever they want to get the life they want the way they want it? Just go ahead and type that in the chat if that's true for you, right? You know, I have this, no, I won't get too much into that. I want to get into the content tonight. But for those of you, a couple of things. First of all, this is a very interactive webinar. I find that the more interaction we have between our online audiences and me, that the more fun and educational, and the more you tend to retain the information. And that's really the point of this webinar, is that everything, we don't do traditional webinars at NLP Power or at David Snyder NLP. Our job when we deliver a webinar, and just like every webinar you've been on, there's going to be an offer at the end. There's going to be a next step to take to bring your life to the next level. However, our job isn't to talk fluff for 90 minutes and then at the end of that say, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. My job here is to, in as a fun and entertaining a format as possible, give you real world stuff that you can take away right from this moment for free, go out into the world and get a result. So we want to give you what we call actionable content, things that you can actually use. Does that sound like a good deal to get something away from this webinar that you can actually use, right? Yes, absolutely. And face reading, which is what the topic of today's webinar is easily one of the most powerful systems for understanding people, whether that's you as a person in terms of your own spiritual path, your own way to find your mission in this world, or if it's looking at others and being able to speed read them and get a glimpse, create a real quick profile, a personality profile, a snapshot of that person's personality, attitude, temperament, thinking style, so that you know how to deal with them, right? And that's really what this is about. Everything at NLP Power is about transformation. It's about transforming you personally from the inside out, about helping you to transform other people and to help people transform the quality of their relationships so everyone gets more of the life that they want the way that they want it. Now, before I jump into what I call the David Dog and Pony Show, I want to give you some basic administrative stuff, things that we need to understand. First of all, if politically incorrect language, colorful metaphors, swearing, or the word boobies offends you, this is not the best use of your time. Okay, I highly invite you to click away to find some other channel where that is more in alignment with your political, spiritual, or value system sensitivities, right? My intention is never to offend anyone, but my style is very provocative. It tends to provoke people. And and that's actually a good thing, because when you get provoked, you find out where your tender points are. You don't notice they're there until somebody pokes the bear, so to speak. So my intention is to teach you and give you really cool stuff, have a great time together in the time that we spend. It's never to offend anyone, but if you do find yourself getting provoked by some of the things that I say, then there's something to look at inside, something for you to explore on your own. That being said, it is not necessary or required for you to believe anything I'm about to share with you on this webinar, or any of my webinars for that matter. I focus a lot of the things that we teach on systems and mechanics that are not belief system dependent, right? So you don't have to believe it in order for it to work for you. You just got to do it and follow the instructions. And if you follow the instructions the way we give it to you, there's a high probability you're going to get a result. And it's going to be the result in the direction you want to go. Would that be cool? To not have to worry about whether you believe it'll work or not, but just being able to follow a set of instructions and actually get a result. Is that useful? I think it is. I find it tremendously liberating, right? Because belief systems change, but mechanics don't. And I like that. Okay, very good. Okay, so first and foremost, I did get my disclaimer out of the way. So once again, if you're sensitive to certain political issues, or racist issues, or sexual orientation issues, or geographic issues, or issues, or tax issues, probably not the best place for you right now. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm not seeking to offend anybody, but I don't have time for bullshit, and I'm pretty sure neither do you. The next thing is that my intention for this webinar, my webinars don't fit neatly into 90 minutes. And we realize that a lot of you coming into this webinar are conditioned to these 90-minute webinars. And so what we've done is we do what we call a free form webinar. And what that means is that for the first 60 to 75 minutes, we are going to deliver as much hardcore content, actionable content as possible. Then we're going to transition into the next step. In other words, the offer that we've prepared for you today. It's always a great deal on some really powerful information that will transform your life. Okay. And that usually takes about 20, 25 minutes to go through that. So we understand what each of the pieces are, how they work together, and how they help you take the information in this webinar to the next level. Once that part is done, we're going to circle back to the content of today's training, and we're going to continue to teach for another 50, 60, another 90, sometimes up to another 90 minutes. We're going to deliver more content so that you can get even more bang for your buck for investing in the time for this webinar. So if you've scheduled a 90-minute block for this webinar, because most of us have to schedule things in nice, neat blocks, then you'll get a good chunk of stuff in that 90 minutes. And you'll be able to go and do your thing with awareness of what the offers are, and then circle back to the other half of the webinar when your time and scheduling permits. For those of you who have dedicated their entire evening to this training, bear with us through the offer part and take action when we ask you to take action, and you're going to get some amazing things that you can do. So my promise to you, if this is the scope of everything that there is to do with face reading, we have time for about this much. So my commitment, in a very succinct way, is I'm going to take you as far as I can into the most actionable and useful and practical applications of this skill set in the time that we have. And then I'll show you where to go to get more, to take your life to the next level, to take your skill sets to the next level. Is that fair? If you think that's a fair trade, go ahead and type that in the chat for me. Cool. Excellent. So 2 more things, then we're going to jump into the David Dog and Pony Show. Hey, how many of you on the webinar today, is this your first time visiting Planet David? Go ahead and type that in the chat. First time, your name and where you're checking in from. And then, of course, if you're a veteran of Planet David, if you've been watching our channel, or subscribed to our channel for any number of times, if you've been to some of our live events, especially, I have a special job for you. As you probably noticed, there's a lot of people. There's at least 70 plus people on the Zoom link, and I don't know how many hundreds of people are coming in on YouTube, and stuff is flying by the chat so fast that if there's a question that comes up, I may miss it. So if you're a veteran of Planet David, if you've been to our live events and you've used the material that they have a question about, and I don't see it or I don't answer it, because a lot of times I'm so focused on delivering the content that I can't answer the questions without derailing the whole presentation. If you can answer those questions and you've had a good result using the question, please, those of you who are veterans for Planet David, please take the time to reach out to the people who are asking the questions and answer the questions. Give people a chance to really, because you expect me to have an agenda, because I'm the guy presenting the webinar. You expect me to say, buy my stuff, it always works, it always works, it always works. But the people on the webinar, the people who've been to the trainings, who've gotten the live events and things of that nature, who've gone out into the world and used these things, they're the ones that really carry the most weight with the audience. So hopefully that's where we go. I love questions. And if you're worried about whether I'll answer your question or not, keep in mind that I always go back and review the chat logs for all of my webinars. And if you don't get your question answered here, if you go to the comments section when this webinar gets posted and re-ask your question, I always reread those comments and I always answer the questions. So that's one last thing. If you come in here expecting to get, if you're a troll expecting to get attention, I have a low to zero tolerance policy. If you start posting messages that are distracting the other members, I will not give you a warning. I will just put you in timeout or ban you. And if you hear kids in the background screaming, it's because they're home and they're hyper. So are we good with that? Is that a fair trade, so to speak? Cool, excellent. And of course, those of you on YouTube, there's about a 45-second to a minute and a half delay, depending on internet speeds, between when I actually speak and when it shows up there. But the chat itself is in real time. So I'll be bouncing back and forth between that stuff. So without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and jump into our formal presentation. I will go as far as we can in the time that we have. If I see a relevant question here and there and it's not going to distract us too much, I'll answer it really quickly. But otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and go through all the different things I've got planned for you tonight. Is that fair? Cool. All right, let's go ahead and do this. So probably the first question for those of you who are first timers is, and by the way, this is how to instantly read anyone's personality in just minutes. And when I first started learning about face reading, I already had about 10 or 15 years worth of handwriting analysis experience. And I thought that when I first discovered it was one of the coolest tools ever. And if you haven't studied any handwriting analysis, I highly recommend that you do. Unfortunately, with all the typing and everything that people are doing nowadays, it's kind of a lost art. It's harder to get a good sample to evaluate, but there is a lot of correlation between the markings of the face and the movements in people's handwritings. So if you get a chance, I'm happy to kind of explore that a little bit with you. But in this course, we're going to talk about how to understand how people think and feel and behave. We're going to show you ways to uncover hidden traumas that have marked on the face, how to read people's repressed emotions, how to know how to influence and persuade them. And if we have time, we'll even show you how to measure sexual and romantic compatibility. So the biggest question that a lot of people have, especially if they're first-time viewers, is who the hell is David Snyder and why should I care? First and foremost, I have a doctorate in Oriental medicine. I've been a licensed and practicing acupuncturist since 2005. I have a clinic here in San Diego where my specialty is treating physiological illness that has as its root repressed emotion. So while a lot of people who are doctors of acupuncture or hypnotists and neurolinguistic programmers, they spend a lot of time on things like weight loss and smoke cessation, nail biting, things of that nature. We tend to get people who are suffering from very, very severe post-traumatic stress, cancers, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, IBS, Crohn's, a lot of physical, chronic, and terminal illness, which is due to repressed emotions. And what you're going to discover as we go through today's training is that there's a lot of correlations between what comes into a hypnotist's office, what comes into an acupuncturist's office, and the markings on the face. And we're going to hopefully bridge that gap so you can see how it all fits together. So I have a doctorate in acupuncture and Chinese medicine from Pacific College of Oriental Medicine. This year, 2020, I was named the #1 NLP trainer in the world by globalgurus.org. I've authored over 15 different products on various forms of human influence, everything from advanced hypnotherapy, energetics, to sales and marketing techniques, conversational hypnosis, covert hypnosis, body language, and how to use nonverbal influence, things of that nature. And I've compressed those trainings into several silos of information. One is the CPI system, the conversational persuasion and influence system. The other is the killer influence system, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a moment. And what's cool about globalgurus.org is every now and then they do things I don't expect. And so what this is right here is a letter I got from globalgurus.org, and it says, "Dear David, it is with great pleasure to announce that your training program, Killer Influence, has been chosen by global peers and ranked as the #1 best program in the world for NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming." You can see here. And what's really cool about this is I had no idea that there was even a contest for this. This just came completely out of the blue. And if you look here, these are all the courses that Killer Influence was compared against and was found to be the #1 program of its type in the world, which is even cooler because I never promoted Killer Influence as an NLP power program or an NLP program. It definitely utilizes NLP, but it's definitely not something that I build as pure NLP. It's like many of the things that I teach. It is absolutely a synergy of many things. Okay, I also hold I'm a lifelong martial artist. And as you can see, I have a 10th degree black belt in Ryukyu Kempo Karate. I have a 4th degree black belt in Shaolin Kun Tao, 2nd degree black belt in Kosho Kempo Ryu, a 1st degree black belt in Fanku Ryu Jiu Jitsu. I'm a certified instructor in combat sistema, Cinco Mono Eskrima, and modern arnis. And I also have a lot of energy healing credentials. I'm a certified Reiki master teacher. I'm a certified pranic healer and advanced pranic healer. I'm also a pranic psychotherapist, certified DNA theta healer. I'm also certified in the Bankston Energy Healing Systems, as well as the Holographic Memory Resolution by Brent Baum. What does all this have to do with? Is because there's, you may ask yourself, what do all these things have in common? And what do all these things have to do with reading faces? Well, the first thing all of these things have in common, acupuncture, Reiki, neuro-linguistic programming, martial arts, they all have one thing in common that stands out, that allows you to really dip below the surface of these things, and that is pattern recognition. What all these things have to do with face reading? Pretty much everything. You're going to see that all these different disciplines are filtered through your neurology, and they're done in a holographic vibrational way. And so when you understand how they fit together, you can start to discern patterns, and these patterns allow you to understand people's processes, how people think, how people feel, how people behave. And once you understand that, you can start to inject things at key points in those structures and those processes and deviate or cause them to veer from their from the course of action they're taking, or predict what they're going to do, and it allows you to plan things more effectively. So this class is for you if you would like to become super attractive and super interesting to members of the opposite sex. If you'd like to become more charming, fascinating, and irresistible, there is no faster way to do it than to start telling people about themselves. If you'd like to learn how to banish fear and insecurity, even stuff you don't know you have from your life, this is something you're going to want to pay attention to. If you'd like to make more money from your job, book more clients for your business, get that raise or promotion that you know you deserve, pay attention to the information in today's webinar, because it can directly impact how you relate to everyone around you, and that can equate to more money, more promotions, and more social influence in your sphere. If you'd like to learn how to protect yourself from manipulators and easily handle difficult people, there are certain telltale markings that people have on their face that can let you know when someone may be a little bit more challenging or may have to be handled in a certain way that might not have been useful, that could have caused you to step on a landmine if you weren't really aware of it. If you'd like to know how to have people thinking and feeling and acting in the way you want them to, have them naturally following your lead, there is probably no better way to get inside somebody's head and heart than understanding the markings on their face. If you'd like to program yourself for financial abundance, this is something that can be very, very powerful as a result of face reading, especially when we start talking about golden path work. If you'd like to inspire your employees, your children, or your spouse to do what you want them to do when you want them to do it, this can give you some very powerful insight into how to present things to them in such a way that they just want to go along with it, because they don't find any resistance to it. If you'd like for those of you who are in the hypnosis and NLP worlds, who are looking for ways to enhance your ability to put people into powerful trance states, trances where you can reprogram them and help them overcome blocks to success, reprogram their subconscious mind, get rid of negative emotions, things of that nature. Face reading induces trance. When you do actual interactive face reading with people, they go into a profound trance and they actually start to process stuff out. So there is an energetic process that happens to people when you start engaging in the traditional face reading approach, that causes people to kind of begin to vent negative emotions and things like that. So it makes you very, very, you got to be, I do warn people who are going to use this for therapeutic applications. This will tend to make you a little bit more provocative when you interact with people. And what I mean by that is that you'll tend to zero in on things. You'll bring them to that person's attention. All of a sudden they'll start to abreact. They'll start to emote spontaneously because you literally poked a very sensitive bear they didn't know they had. So again, if you're going to use face reading, you need to use it with respect and with the proper amount of gentleness and compassion, because it will tend to make you a little bit more influential with people for, even the slightest things. So if you've said yes to any of the things on this training, then you're probably in the right place, and we're going to jump into content. Okay. So here's my personal promise to you. Once again, I'm going to take you as far as I can in the time that we have, and I'm going to point you in the direction of where to go for more. But that only happens if you stay to the end. So if you stay to the end, this is what I'm going to do my best to deliver to you today. I'm going to teach you some of the most powerful and effective ways to read and understand yourself and anyone you meet. I'm going to teach you how to understand and profile personality and temperament, how to discover people's trauma histories, how to read it on their face, how to know what ages they happened at, how to begin to profile people and discern sexual and romantic compatibility, how to read personality and I repeated myself there. And finally, I'm going to teach you how to become a master of people reading and people influencing. Does that sound like a good agenda for today? If you think that's a good agenda, go ahead and type that in the chat. Cool. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So this is where we jump to me. Hi. All right. Here's what I'd like you to do right now. Now, that's my agenda for today. But what I'd like to share, what I'd like to ask you guys now is, what are your biggest, most important questions that you have right now about face reading? In other words, if you logged into this webinar with these one or two burning questions, that if you came away with these the concrete, practical, workable answers to that question, you would feel like you've gotten more than your time's investment worth. Whatever those questions may be, I want you to go ahead and type that into the chat right now so I can customize the content of today's webinar to meet those needs as best I can. So go ahead, take a few minutes and type into the chat exactly where you want to use this stuff and how you would like to use it. And once again, I apologize for the kids in the background. It's just kind of a thing when two girls get home all hyper from school. Reading people to know how to respond to them. Okay. How old does someone have to be in order to read stuff on their face from past traumas? Excellent. How to read with masks. Pick up on forgotten traumas. Okay. Determine romantic compatibility between partners. It sounds like I nailed it on the head with this one. Okay. Emotional info visible on the face. Oh, we'll cover that in spades, Kathleen. Find comparability in friendships and business. How to get rid of trauma lines, reading people. Excellent. How can we help the younger generation and to be honest? Self-application, how to get rid of trauma, be more social and hold conversations. Okay, you guys are all in the right place. So here's what I'm going to do while you're typing that in. I'm just going to take a minute and see if I can calm down my hellions just a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to get into stuff. Hold on a second. All right, we're back. Okay, guys. So a lot of great questions, and let's go ahead and start jumping into the answers. So one of the problems that I had, and let me explain kind of where I come from. My teacher in face reading, who is still my teacher today, and I still go to her for advanced trainings and actually to review things, is a woman by the name of Lillian Pearl Bridges. And so if you're interested in getting the tradition, she comes from a long line of face readers as part of her family tradition. And she teaches in a very classical Taoist way. I think she's absolutely amazing. She's so good, she can look at your face and actually discern your Myers-Briggs profile. I'm working up to that. I'm not there yet. But one of the reasons that I mention her is because it's tradition to always honor your lineage and honor your teacher. And so I just want to give a shout out to Lillian and say thank you for all the amazing things you've taught me and will continue to teach. I highly recommend, if you want to go deeper into face reading, that you grab her book. It's called Face Reading in Chinese Medicine by Lillian Pearl Bridges. You can find it on Amazon. You can also go to her website, lotusinstitute.com, and purchase it through her. She doesn't make a lot because but anything helps. And so I just want to, really say thank you to Lillian for said. What I'm going to share with you is my approach to face reading. And what I mean by that is when I started studying face reading, everything I was taught presupposed that you had a background in Chinese medicine, that you understood yin and yang and the five elements and how they interact and the behaviors that go with it and the symptomologies and the organ relationships and things of that nature. And I realized as I was going through it that not everything in the face reading system was immediately applicable to the areas we're in right now, which is persuasion and influence. And then finally, transformation is usually big on people's lists. So what I'm going to share with you is the things that I discovered that immediately jumped out at me to be instantly actionable, that would give you an advantage in a negotiation, a relationship, and really you can just something you can take out in the world and use right away. And the first thing that came to mind to me was when Lillian started talking about how people make decisions and how that relates to the markings on the face. So one of the things that happens is that you can divide the face into zones, and that's what we're going to do. That's the approach that we're going to take today. And we're going to skip some of the things that are done that are taught in the classical approach because they're not immediately applicable to what we want to do. But then we'll fill those blanks in as we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is how people process information and how that relates to how they think and how you can begin to use it to change the way you present information to get the most positive response from that person. Would that be useful? Do you think that would be useful? Okay, so that's where we're going to go first. So when we start looking at the face, we want to start thinking about zones. And so what we've got here is understanding how people think, indicators of cognitive preference. So when we start to look at indicators of cognitive preference, we want to divide the head itself into three distinct areas here. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to pay attention to the relative size of each area compared to the others. So if we start, and we'll start with zone 1 here, 2, and 3. So people who have a much larger area from the top of the eyebrow to about the hairline is where I was taught to measure, but some people do the top of the head. But I use the hairline as a reference. So this area here is, if this area is larger in proportion than the rest of the face, you're looking at somebody who is very, very data driven. These are people who do not necessarily make snap decisions. They want all the data. One of my colleagues and partners now, Brandon Burr, who runs Jet Webinar and who is actually manning the back of the room on this webinar. If you look at his head, he looks like an upside down bowling pin, his head. Now, I don't mean that disparagingly, but his upper zone is massive. He's very data driven. And every time you ask him a question, he tends to answer in spreadsheets, right? He's just that way. And it's a good thing because he wants to know the numbers. So if you're dealing with somebody that has a very large upper zone, it's important to lead with the facts and the data to support your conclusions, right? They're going to want to know it. They want to climb into it. They're going to want to crunch the numbers themselves. So if you come at them like at a zone 3, which is an emotional, instinctive level, telling people how much they're going to love it, but you don't have any data to support it, they're going to kick you out. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about with regard to these 3 zones is that it's not one or the other. So what do I mean by that? In NLP, we have these things called propulsion systems. And what happens with a propulsion system is that you move, they say you move towards pleasure towards pleasure and away from pain. And they try, and people tend to classify you as a towards or an away from kind of a person. But the truth is that none of us are towards or away from. We are either towards with starting with towards, moving towards away from, or away from moving towards pleasure. So in other words, we move towards pleasure and away from pain, or we move away from pleasure or away from pain and towards pleasure. Does that make sense? I'm kind of stumbling over my feet right now, or stumbling over my tongue. But I just want you to understand that, and I'm going to show you how that relates to this in a moment. But are we clear? So people either move towards pleasure and away from pain, or towards pain, or away from pain and towards pleasure. It's both. Consequently, when we look at somebody who is, when we look at somebody's 3 zones, what we want to know is, what do they do first? What do they do first? And we can always tell what they do first by which zone is the biggest. Oops. Let's go down here. That would be their first zone, right? And then we look at the second biggest zone. Then we look at the third biggest zone. Why? Because this tells us, when we look at these 3 things, it gives us the sequence of data to deliver. So when I look at somebody who's got a large upper zone, and that zone is bigger than any other place, I know I need to start with giving them the facts and figures, giving them the data, right? If I notice that the middle zone is the next biggest, then I want to tell them all the different ways that they can use what I'm presenting to them, or how what I'm talking about will benefit them in practical, easy to understand sequences, right? And then finally, I want to talk to them by how much they're going to love it, or how much they should trust their gut on this. Now, what if I'm looking at somebody and I see the reverse? What if I see that this lower zone is actually the biggest, and then their data zone is second, and then their pragmatic zone is third? Well, what that tells me is that I need to talk to people first about how much they're going to love it, how much they should go with their gut on what I'm about to talk to them. And then I'm going to give them the data to support that. And then I'm going to outline all the practical ways that they can use it. So when we look at zones of the face, and the way we measure, when we look at zones of the face, we're looking at the sequence. What is the relative proportions? And that will give us an order about how to talk. What if every zone is the same? And these people often have trouble making a decision if every zone is the same. But when you see that, then you would focus on, I would go to a criterion values listation. But people who, I find as a rule, if you have trouble figuring out if people are balanced like this, I found my good rule of thumb is to start with the pragmatic zone. I start in the middle. Okay. And then once I see how they respond, I'll jump to data or to the instinctive or the emotional zone. Now, one of the things you need to understand about people with very large lower zones, they tend to be very physical or emotional. One of the good ways that you can test this, by the way, is to go to places that are tech-based campuses. In other words, like down here in San Diego, right down the street from my house is a place called Qualcomm. And if you go and hang out on the campus at Qualcomm during lunch, everybody, with very few exceptions, are huge up here, a little bit smaller here, and even smaller here. Because those kinds of activities attract people who are very data oriented. Okay. Now, if you go to something like an MMA gym, what you will tend to see is bigger upper zone, slightly smaller practical zone, and then the cognitive zones. I'm not saying that they're not smart at all, but you're going to see the emphasis. This is going to be even smaller. Now, what you will see on a lot of people who are in MMA gyms, especially if you don't see a lot of variance here, you'll see a lot of protuberance in these areas right here. Big jaw, big eyebrow bones. Okay, we'll talk about those a little bit later. These are very associated with athletic ability. Okay, but when we start looking at ways that people can begin to think and the way people make decisions, and if we want to learn how to present information in such a way that people will take the information in and process it in the most harmonious way possible, this gives us some very powerful insight. If you look at my if you look at my upper zone, I'm extremely data driven, but my practical zone is almost as big. And a lot of the things that drive me are, how can I use this? Once I get the data, I'm like, applications just start popping out of my plate and I just go for it. That's kind of my sequence: data, pragmatism, and then, but I'm not very spreadsheet oriented. I want to know really the data that's going to help me the most and how I can make it actionable. So does this make sense that we can look at the zones? Again, the upper zone is from the top of the eyebrows to the hairline. The middle zone is from the eyebrow line to the philtrum. And then from the philtrum to the chin is your lower zone. So are we good there? Cool. Now remember, you don't got to believe this. Just go and watch people. Go amongst humans in their natural habitat and observe, right? And again, I would recommend that you start by actually learning to measure each of these zones. Go to your family members, measure the zones, and notice how consistent that is or not consistent that is, right? Horst is saying, I think every human is primarily emotionally driven. That is true. But what's their lead representational system? In other words, do they just love it and they go for it? Do they see the practical applications and they get a feeling that it's good and then they go for it? Or do they take the numbers, they get a feeling, and then they go for it? Horst you're not wrong in that every human being makes decisions based on emotion, but what leads to that emotional response? And what's the fastest, most direct route to that emotional response? Looking at the different zones of the face can give you the smoothest sequence of information presentation to get that emotional response in the direction that you want them to go, right? Does that make sense? Cool, excellent. All right, so when I first started learning this was like one of the coolest things because I saw immediately how we could use this. And I found it to be largely true. If I go into a meeting with somebody and I see this big upper zone, I know I'm going to have all my data ready because they're going to ask me questions that I'm going to need data to support. These people are very evidence-based. So are these people, but they're going to spend more time on the practical applications and the results it generated than the data that supports the conclusion. Okay. If one eyebrow is lower than the other, which one should we take as a measurement? I would be conservative and go with the upper one. Like I said, my experience has been, and again, this is just purely my field results watching people, is that when the areas are evenly balanced or there's any ambiguity in which zone may be dominant, I start with the pragmatic zone because as far as I know, people always want results. They always want to know how something is going to benefit them. The question is, how do they go about believing in the truth of that solution? Do they trust their gut, right? Or do they trust the data that supports it, right? So to me, if you can't accurately determine which is dominant, I start with the pragmatic zone, and then based on the responses and the questions that they ask me, I'll go with data or I'll go with their gut feelings. And if I'm echoing them, like I've taught you in Secrets of Human Influence or Mental Training Secrets or Weapons of Social Seduction, then you're going to nail their strategy no matter what. But this nice thing about face reading is I can see this from across the room. And so before I've even interacted with them, before I've even engaged with them, I can start to create in my mind a working profile that can serve as a roadmap for how to deal with them. Whereas a lot of times when I'm in a conversation with somebody and I'm thinking about all these different things, there's a lot of other information that I'm having to juggle. So I like to focus on things that I can ascertain from a distance, so that by the time I'm interacting with them, I have the ability to have a map to follow. Okay, that's just how I do it. Is that useful to anybody? Cool. All right. Let's go back to this. So again, the first thing we want to look at is the order and sequence of their zones. Is their upper zone bigger? Is their middle zone bigger? Is their lower zone bigger? right? Remember that people who are, and in Chinese medicine, we call this the heaven zone. The people in the upper zone are very data driven. They're very mental. They're very cognitive. This correlates also to handwriting analysis. People who have a lot of handwriting traits that move into their upper zone of their handwriting tend to be very cognitive. They be very creative, right? People who in the middle zone are more pragmatic. They're results oriented. They want to know how this is going to help them. And finally, the people with the larger lower zones tend to be very emotional. They tend to be very instinctive. They go with their gut a lot of times. So this is a great way to begin to really drill down on a person's potential personality and temperament. So let's move on to the next piece, which we call public and private. When we talk about public and private, you know, my good friend Chase Hughes, when he talks to his students, he tells his students that everyone you meet is wearing a mask. And depending on what kind of influence you're going for, you either want to support that mask or peel it away. In face reading, we have this concept called original face, public face, and private face. And the way we start to discern this is by dividing the face into sections, not horizontally, but vertically, right down the center. The right side of your face is your public side. This is the face that you show the world. This is the face that you want people to believe is the real you, okay? The left side of your face is your private side. This is the real you, who you are when nobody's looking, the person that you want to be when you're not having to put on a show, when you're amongst a few intimate friends or in your closest relationships. This is when you let down the walls, so to speak. And so when we start to look at people, most people are right-eye dominant. And so what happens is when we look at people, we tend to look with our right eye at their right side. In order for us to easier see a person's private face or private persona, it's best to use your left eye to look at the left side of the face. Okay, so this takes a little bit of training. Now, this is actually really, really useful once you understand how various facial characteristics equate to various types of emotions and various types of emotional openness to responses. For example, one of the things we'll talk about really quick is the size of a person's eyes. Most people's faces are not symmetrical. And so if you look at a person many times, you'll see that the eye on one side of their face is actually bigger than the eye on the other side of their face. And the size of the eye, how wide they hold it open, is analogous to how emotionally expressive a person is, how readily they take in information, how suggestible they may be. Lower or smaller eyes that are more held, even if they're big eyes, but they're held more closed. This tends to show you how guarded a person is, how much they guard and put up barriers between their inner world and their outer world. So if you're looking at somebody's face and the right side of their face, the eye is very big and very open. What you can intuit from that is that in their public life, in their business life, these people are much more outgoing, much more open, much more conversational and interactive than when they're alone, when they're in their private life. And you can start to see a correlation between the size of people's eyes and the size of their loops in their handwriting. There's actually a direct correlation there that you can draw. And so, we like people who hold their eyes wide, who hold their eyes open. Not scary open, but big and wide. This shows us that someone is very open, very they're not holding things back so much. They're not as secretive, right? So one of the things we start to look at when we start to look at private versus public is when we look at the features, which we'll talk a little bit about the features themselves towards the end of the webinar, but we're going to spend a lot more time on emotions today. Is that okay if we spend a lot of time on emotions? Go ahead and type it in the chat if that's okay. Excellent. Excellent. Right. And in advanced trainings, and for those of you who are wondering, we do have a face reading, 3-day face reading training coming up. It's a virtual training coming up this weekend. We do have a few slots left. If you're interested, you can reach out to Stephanie and she'll teach you or show you how to get into that. So let's go back to this. So one of the things we want to pay attention to is the size of one feature to another, public versus private. This starts to give us two separate profiles. And depending on what our outcome is, we want to speak to one side of the face or the other. Now, here's what I mean by that. In the business world, it's all about appearances. It's all about impressions and branding and image, right? So when you see people and you look at their right side, what you're seeing is their brand. In other words, the image that they want you to have of them. And so if you want to get further faster with people in the business world, you want to present to the face they show the public. Okay? If you want to gain deeper intimacy and emotional leverage, hold on a second, emotional leverage on somebody. So let's say this is a romantic relationship, a familial relationship, you know, husband, wife, sibling to sibling, father to daughter, or father to son, mother to daughter. You want to spend more time here, because this is who they really are. And these are the things that actually drive them to do the things that they do when they're not at work. Does that make sense? Is this useful? Okay. Now remember, face reading by itself is very powerful. When you add face reading to echo technique and 3 magic questions and the resistance removal protocols and the criterion values elicitation processes that we teach you in our other classes and our other webinars, you get a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. You gain tremendous, tremendous leverage over the internal and external worlds of the people you interact with. Now, that's tremendous power to have, so it needs to be respected and used appropriately. I'm not a persuasion cop, right? And you will sow what you reap, but this gives you tremendous psychological influence over people. So, and we've just covered 2 ways of looking at things. So Steph is asking, so yin is on their right side and yang is on their left side, correct? Yes, based on this system of Chinese medicine. And by the way, just for the record, you do not need to know Chinese medicine or yin and yang to use what I'm teaching you right here. I deliberately chose things that were yin and yang independent. You didn't need to know anything about that to be able to use this. But for those of you who want to know the traditional aspects of this, the right side in this system is considered yin. The left side is considered yang. Okay? And this is right out of Lillian's book, so feel free to reference it or call her with any questions that you may ask. Now, I got to be honest with you. If when we start looking at yin and yang and male and female, right and left, things can get pretty wonky. So I would recommend that you push the yin and yang aspects of this kind of to the background and just focus on the practical aspects of what I'm teaching you. Left side is private, right side is public. When you look at people's right side versus their left side, you're going to look at the size, length, and depth of features from one side to the other to determine where they're stronger. The question asked is, which book is this from? This Face Reading and Chinese Medicine by Lillian Pearl Bridges. You can get it on Amazon. Okay, cool. All right. So next piece I want to talk about is called the emotional map of the face. And once again, this is again top to part of the big three. When I was learning face reading and she started going through this was like pay dirt. How many people, just for my edification, are in some form of coaching or therapy? You know, they're a therapist or mentor or something like that. Okay. If this is where we start to get into the really, really, really powerful stuff, because once we understand, you know, the thinking zones, in other words, data-driven, pragmatic, emotional or instinctive, public side versus private side. Now we factor in emotions. Now we can start to extrapolate a very robust profile of this person, and we can do it very, very quickly. And it'll start to lead you to places in them, as you can start to discern trauma history, you can start to look at sexual and romantic compatibility and put things together in a way that's useful for us. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Now, we won't have time to do the full map before it's time to take our break. And